and I would put my dough in the Rubbermaid containers and put the lid on to stack them. And I had no idea that what I was doing was trapping all of the warmth in the dough inside that container. And they overproofed very badly just because, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. Welcome to the Breadwinner Podcast. This is the show for sourdough microbakery owners who are building a sustainable, successful, profitable business from their home. If you are already in business or if you're dreaming of starting one, this is the place for you. I'm your host, Caroline Bauer. I own a successful in-home sourdough bakery, and I am here to share everything I've learned that works and that doesn't, plus everything that I'm researching along the way so we can build thriving businesses together. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Breadwinner Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I am really excited about today's episode. I maybe say that every time, but this is a fun one. I got the idea to make this episode when I was organizing my shelf and realized there were some things that I had spent money on earlier on when I was starting my business that I never ended up using or used very minimally that were not good investments. And I can see that looking back, and it's easy to see the replacements that were better. So the intention of this episode is not to shame my previous self for not knowing what I didn't know, nor is it to make you feel bad for maybe spending money on things that you didn't use or just not knowing what you might or might not need as you're building your business. But rather, the intention is to help you learn and think through. Maybe you can skip part of the learning curve that I've already experienced for you. And also, it might help you think through what's going to be the best investment for you. And maybe you just save the money rather than spending money on something and then spending more money on its replacement. So this isn't a comprehensive list at all, but what I did was go through my Amazon history and I took a screenshot of everything that I purchased and either didn't use at all or didn't use very much. And I am just going to share it all here. So I'm sharing my worst investments. And then on the flip side, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time and share some of the best things that I've spent money on to grow my business. So this list is in no particular order, and we'll just go ahead and jump on in, and I'm going to share the thought behind why I purchased it in the first place, what I was hoping for, what I experienced, and when it makes sense, I'll share what I replaced it with. So the very first thing is some knit oven gloves. They were labeled as heat resistant. They were probably the lowest priced option that seemed like it was going to allow me to take the lids off of my Dutch oven. This was very early in my cottage bakery experience, but they literally could not handle the heat. Within just a couple of uses, I was burning my fingertips through them, and they were just terrible. If you were going to invest in protective oven gloves, I highly recommend the brand Lanon, Lanon. They are silicone, they fit your hands beautifully. They allow you to have pretty decent dexterity considering they're gloves, and they extend up your wrist really well to help avoid the baker burns. I have a good handful of those from before I owned the Lanon gloves. They're a little pricier than some of the alternatives, but they are worth every penny. The second one was a glass spray bottle, just a basic spray bottle, but it was glass. I love glass. Honestly, in my home kitchen, I use very little plastic. However, in a bakery context where it's just a high traffic area, you're moving things around all the time, glass is generally a disaster waiting to happen, unless if it is somewhere where you really are not going to be moving it around a lot. So glass is not a great option for a spray bottle. I purchased it to mist my loaves, and it was broken within 2 or 3 days, shattered on the ground, and it just drove home for me the importance of not using glass for the things that will get used a whole lot. So around the same season is when I transitioned from using glass mason jars for my starter to using plastic Cambro containers. Again, I love glass. I use glass for as much as I possibly can for food storage, but in the bakery context, when you are cranking out a lot of bread and just repeatedly moving things around, and there's just a high likelihood that something might get knocked down, food safe plastic is really the best option. The next one were non-stick loaf pans. So when I started to branch out into sandwich loaves, I searched for the most cost-effective loaf pan I could possibly find. You're hearing a theme here. I was always looking for the most cost-effective option. And so I bought, I think, 24 nonstick black loaf pans, and they worked fine for the first few weeks, couple months, but they were not designed to withstand high temperatures. And so after a couple months of baking with them every week or so, the black nonstick coating started to transfer onto my bread, which is a very much no-go, and replace them with stainless steel loaf pans, which do not have a coating that's going to transfer onto the bread. And I feel much, much better about baking with those. Lesson learned, I should have just invested in the slightly more expensive product that was not going to transfer toxins into my bread.
Today's episode of the Breadwinner podcast is sponsored by Sunrise Flour Mill. I recently sent a poll to my Sourdough Microbakery customers, and I learned that 29% of them prioritize organic ingredients, and they're willing to pay more for them. That sent me on a hunt for high-quality organic flour that aligned with my business values, and I absolutely found it in Sunrise Flour Mill. Everything that I've baked with their heritage organic flour so far has turned out beautifully. My husband even commented that he thought it tasted better without me even saying anything. Their ethos is every day from scratch, which I resonate with so deeply, with this idea of making every decision intentionally, even down to the organic flour that you're baking with. I feel so good about offering products with Sunrise Heritage flour to my family, but also to my customers. Sunrise has generously offered a 20% off coupon to listeners of the podcast, and you can find it down in the show notes if you want to try this flour for yourself.
The next thing was muffin boxes. These were cardboard boxes to hold a half dozen jumbo muffins. And the design of the boxes is like assembling some sort of complex origami structure. They're extremely complicated to put together, just a pain. I still have some. It is, I think, 8 or 9 months after I bought them, and I'm still trying to use them up because they are just not well-designed boxes. I have since found that the keyword to search for when you're looking for packaging that is a box is auto pop-up. These are going to be your boxes that are already glued in the right places so that you just open them up and the sides fold out and you don't have to stick the tabs together to assemble them. They save so much headache and so much frustration. These muffin holder boxes, the terrible ones, it was an instance where I had not planned ahead and I needed to look for a packaging option that I could get quickly. And this was one of the only options that would arrive really quickly and was probably the most budget-friendly option. You're hearing a theme. I have learned time and again, and maybe it's finally starting to sink in, that the cheapest option is not always the best option. The second part of the theme that hopefully you're hearing is I make poorer purchasing decisions when I do not plan ahead. This might be a lifelong lesson that I continue to learn, but it is becoming very apparent, and I am becoming much more mindful and much better at planning ahead, particularly for things like packaging, to make sure that I know what's going to be on my menu and I know at least a week or two in advance what I need for packaging. I have also, just part of my business growth experience, I pretty much have a small go-to selection of packaging that fits all my different varieties of products. And I just reorder the same things that work really well. And I've kind of weeded out the ones that maybe tear easily or that the lids don't stay on or the boxes are a pain to put together. And part of that just comes with trial and error. I will go ahead and put down in the show notes just a list with links to all of the packaging that I really like to use, so that if you are looking for something to hold your bread, your cookies, your scones, your muffins, I will put those products that I reorder and let you know what I use them for. So that'll be down in the show notes. moving on, the next thing that I bought early on when I was looking for cost-effective solutions was a Banneton alternative. So I started out just very slowly building up my collection of Bannetons. I started with the more traditional wicker ones. And when I didn't have enough, the cheapest option that I could find locally was just the little square Rubbermaid containers that you can get in a pack of 5 for $4 at Walmart. What I did not know is that the square containers that are just solid plastic do not allow any sort of breathing. And so when you put dough in a solid container, especially if it's already bulk dough that is pretty well fermented, and then you close it in there without the ability to breathe or without the ability for the air to circulate and cool it down quickly, it is very likely to overproof, especially if you are covering it. So I used these like last fall when I was doing little mini pumpkin shaped loaves. And I would put my dough in the Rubbermaid containers and put the lid on to stack them. And I had no idea that what I was doing was trapping all of the warmth in the dough inside that container. And they overproofed very badly just because, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so hopefully, maybe this will help you skip that learning curve and know that if you're using something like a bowl or a container that doesn't breathe, leave the cover off so that it can cool down easily, or cover it with something breathable like a tea towel. The other kind of Banneton alternative that I tried was silicone loaf pans. And again, same principle. They couldn't breathe and the dough just stayed way too warm, could not cool down well. And those were just not a great solution either. I used those a handful of times and then they just stayed on a high shelf for months. The alternative that I've moved toward is the plastic wicker bread baskets, which you see a lot of bakers using. If you're watching me on YouTube, you can see them on the shelf behind me. They are quite inexpensive. They are breathable. They are also washable. You could stick them in the dishwasher if you need to. They are not going to harbor mold like the wicker Bannetons tend to do. I've actually thrown away a pretty big handful of the wicker Bannetons, which are not cheap because they began to grow mold. Another one of those many learning curves to make sure that they are really drying out well before you stack them. But you won't experience that issue with the plastic wicker ones. And so I just line those with a organic cotton tea towel. And that is an excellent solution for a Banneton that's much more budget friendly. And also they take up less space than the more expensive wicker Bannetons. So if you're looking for a solution, that is a great one. They come in packs of 30 to 40 usually. If you're buying the like $1.25 baskets at the Dollar Tree, these work really similarly and they are very similarly priced as well. The next thing that I spent some money on, and again, this was a kind of last minute purchase. I needed something fast and I looked for the most budget friendly option for parchment paper loaf pan liners. The ones that I ended up purchasing did not have any reviews. I should have known better, but it was a large package of high quantity for a relatively low price, and they would be here overnight. And so I ordered them and I baked up, I think it was 10 or 15 loaves of sandwich bread, and the liners stuck like glue. I had to literally cut them off. I refunded all of my customers, and it was very upsetting. So I very nervously ordered an alternate brand of loaf liners and they were great. And so really it was the brand. I wasn't sure if it was my method, but it was the brand. And I have since stuck with the same brand that's been reliable and had great success. No more sticking bread. But again, I did not plan ahead and I was looking for the cheapest option and it backfired. Hopefully you are picking up on that and going to learn and not make the same mistakes that I have. The next one was compostable carryout bags for the very first market I did. I, again, just looked for the cheapest option for bags on Amazon. And rather than buying like paper handled bags, which is what I use now, which they do cost a little more. I bought these super thin green, like grocery bags, and they just look tacky. So I used them only for that first market and literally still have them. I've never used them all up. Moral of the story, I should have just spent a little more for the paper bags, but now I know. Again, I am not shaming myself for what I didn't know. I was doing the best with what I had, but hindsight says just invest in the thing that offers a more professional experience for your customers, as well as the thing that I definitely will fully use up, rather than just using part of the package and never using the rest. The last thing I have on my list of purchases from Amazon that I did not end up using is a cheap probe thermometer. Again, I looked for the cheapest one I could find, and it broke within a couple of weeks. I wonder if I will make another update episode in a year with more lessons learned. Hopefully not. Hopefully, this is what I needed to really sit and think about my purchasing decisions. I really do feel like I have learned a lot and become much more intentional and methodical and careful about choosing items that will last and that serve the purpose and are quality, rather than just looking for the cheapest or the quickest option. All right. Hopefully that was really helpful, maybe insightful, maybe got some wheels turning. Once again, just to reiterate, this is absolutely not to shame my past self, nor to make you feel bad for purchases that were not the best possible purchase. But when we know better, we can do better. And so that's the intention here. Now, on to the good stuff, the fun purchases that have paid for themselves over and over again. I categorize this, I just sat and thought for a quick minute about the things that I reach for over and over again on a daily or weekly basis in my bakery. So I've categorized it by just the small, low-cost tools, medium, and large. And so if you are wondering where to start as far as putting a little bit of money into equipment, this list is a really good starting spot. These are the things that, if you need a gift idea, if someone's asking you what to gift you with, send them something from this list and just say, any of these, please. So number one is a good bench scraper. Mine is right there because I was just using it, slightly out of reach, but it has a solid wooden handle. It's just a solid, straight piece of metal. And I use it for everything. I scrape the dried dough off my counter with it all the time. So it's super helpful for cleaning counters. I use it daily for dividing dough, for chopping up my scones, all the things. I reach for it constantly. So a great bench scraper. The next are plastic Cambro containers. For those of you on YouTube, this is my smallest size of Cambro container. It is 1 quart, so it's equal to 4 cups. This is what I feed up my starter. So I keep just a really small amount of starter during the week when I am not baking. And then when I'm ready to bulk it up, I feed it up to 300 grams in this 1 quart container. And then I transfer that 300 grams into a much larger Cambro container. My largest is a 12 quart round Cambro. And so I will bulk that up. So if I have 300 grams and I need 6,000 grams, for example, for my bake day, which is a pretty common number that I use, I put 3,000 grams of water, 3,000 grams of flour, and then this little 300 gram Cambro of starter into that. And I give it 12 to 18 hours to rise. And then whatever is left in this little tiny Cambro, after I've scraped it all out, that's what I feed. So I end up with maybe 10 or 20 grams left in this little thing, and I feed it. And that is just what I maintain. So I'm always maintaining it with a really high ratio of flour and water, which keeps the bacteria super healthy and balanced and keeps my starter really well maintained. That was a little tangent about starter maintenance, since this is filled with my starter right now. So anyway, Cambro containers have been a really excellent investment. I have multiple in multiple sizes. One thing worth noting is that I did not start with multiple containers. I started with just one of the 4 quart containers, and I used this for all the things, for feeding my starter, for bulking it up. And then as my business grew, I added to my collection little by little over time. So do not feel like you need to buy all the things all at once. You make do with what you have until that is slowing you down, and then you strategically can continue to build. Same thing goes with like plastic dough bins. That was one of my very first investments, was just one large plastic bin that I could mix a bulk batch of dough in. And then after a month or two, I got a second large bin and just grew it from there. My favorite place to purchase the large plastic Cambros and bins and the small ones is Restaurant Depot. If you have one near you, it's just an in-person restaurant supply store where you can purchase bulk ingredients, supplies at a pretty good price, much better for the containers than like Amazon. So if you have one near you, you can go in and get a day pass for free. The other benefit of the Cambros is that these will not shatter. If you drop these on the floor, they will bounce, they might spill, but you will not end up with shards of glass in your starter. All right, the next wonderful investment that I absolutely love, and I mentioned these earlier, but it is the Lannon gloves, silicone gloves that just are the best of the best. These are designed to allow you to handle your hot bread, to manipulate your hot Dutch ovens, your hot trays. Now, as with pretty much any heat resistant glove, if you're holding something for a long time, you're going to start to feel the heat through it. However, the Lannon gloves are the best oven glove that I have ever tried. And like I said before, they cover a lot of your arm. So you won't get these scars that come from bumping the edge or the top of the oven that so many bakers experience. The final item on my list of smaller investments is a really great LOM. Mine is from Wire Monkey, which is a really great brand that serves the microbakery community really well. But you don't have to get one that is a brand name. There are a lot of options on Amazon, and I know plenty of people who love the ones they've found on Amazon. Again, if you're looking for the very cheapest option, I would caution you to do so mindfully, just because as I have experienced and as I have just exhibited, the cheapest option is not always built to last and may not be the best way to go. So it is often worth putting just a little bit more investment into a piece of equipment if you know that it is a piece of equipment that really is built to last. For example, the Wire Monkey LOM, I just know it is perfectly aligned. I have the little round UFO one. It always screws together perfectly. And it is just a beautiful little piece of equipment. When I first started, I was just holding the blade and I cut myself so many times that finally I put a LOM on my Christmas list last year and my husband got that for me. I love it. I use it every single bake day. And it is one of my absolute favorite baking supplies. Moving on to the medium range investments. These are a little bit pricier. The first one is a really great scale. I started out with the food scale that most of us probably start with, just small, 6 inches by 8 inches. Works fine until you start scaling up and you realize that you have filled your bin most of the way and you have exceeded the capacity of your scale, and it zeroes out, or it says E, and now you have no idea how much is in your bin. I know I'm not the only one who's experienced that because other people have told me the same thing. So after experiencing that a couple times and after kind of MacGyvering for a few weeks and like adding half the flour and then having to do the math to add the next half, I realized that it was time to invest in a higher capacity scale. And so I baby stepped this one. The second scale that I purchased, we use in our home kitchen now, and it was still a little bit smaller with kind of a mid-range capacity. But then eventually I purchased my scale that I use all the time. It is super solid, just feels really well made. It has a metal surface and a really large flat surface. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm showing it to you. The work surface is huge, so it holds all my bins, but also I can even put my dough on the surface and pre-shape my dough directly on this scale if I need to. I don't have to try to like balance a plate on there. I can put everything directly on there. It cleans up really nicely. This was an investment. It was not a cheap scale, but it is built to last, and it is just an absolutely fantastic piece of equipment. It runs on battery, and I only have to change the battery I don't know, every 4 months or so, even though I use it almost daily. I did recently cheap out on a second scale. I purchased a much less expensive one, but also with a high 33-pound capacity, like my good scale. And you can just feel the difference in the quality. It is very clear that the second scale that I recently purchased is just a third of the price, and it just feels like it's not going to last forever. It is important when I have my assistant in here that we're both able to use the scale because that was becoming a bottleneck. So that's why I bought a second one. But I knew going into that I was purchasing something that was not going to last super. And in that context, I was honestly okay with it. I didn't want to buy another $100 scale. And so the $30 one works and does the job. The next piece of equipment that I absolutely love and use constantly and highly recommend, it is one of my favorite investments that I have made in my business, is a thermal printer. Now, I actually bought my thermal printer for a previous business when I was shipping a lot of packages, and there were a lot fewer brands available on the market. So the one that I have, the brand is Rollo, and it is more expensive than a lot of the brands that are now available, but it is a workhorse and it prints so clearly. You don't need an app to use it. So I just design my labels in Canva, download them as a PNG, and print straight from my laptop. And I absolutely love it. So doesn't matter what brand you get, but if you are printing your labels on your home printer and it is a slow part of your process, I cannot recommend a thermal printer enough. It is an investment that will pay for itself so quickly. They do not run on ink. They use heat to transfer your image onto your labels. The labels are inexpensive, and it is just worth that investment. Finally, in my medium investment category is stainless steel loaf pans. So I mentioned these before, and I put this in the medium investment because when you're buying 24 loaf pans, it is a larger investment. You can spread it out and buy 8 at a time or 6 at a time, whatever you need to. But these are a workhorse. They are sturdy. They will last forever. And I am so much happier with the stainless steel loaf pans than, like I mentioned before, the nonstick ones that I started with. I cold proof my sandwich loaves in the loaf pan with a parchment paper liner and then just pop that straight in the oven. And they always turn out beautifully and require pretty minimal cleaning and just really easy to work with. So love that one. Moving on to the largest investments that I have made in my bakery and would recommend. Number one is my double oven. So I spent my first about 6 months baking out of my home oven. And it just became very clear that was absolutely a bottleneck and not sustainable. I was doing 14 to 16-hour bake days. And so we made the decision to invest in a double oven. I've talked about this a few times before, but I started with a really inexpensive one that was used from Facebook Marketplace, and that kind of got me rolling. And then I upgraded to a brand new model a few months later. And I chose to go with a double oven rather than a bread oven just because that was the entry point that was possible for me. And it has allowed me to build my business without having to finance a really large piece of equipment. And I have been super, super happy with it. The question that I often get asked is, will I still get an actual bread oven at some point? And the answer is yes. Ultimately, because running a residential double oven at 450 degrees for 5 hours at a time, a couple times a week, that is not the intended use for that type of equipment. So if I keep doing that, it's going to burn out eventually, honestly. And so I just know that a bread oven that is designed to operate at those high heats for an extended period of time is going to be a necessary investment at some point. So I am slowly budgeting for that, but I have been so happy with my open baking situation in my double oven. And so if you are at a point where you need to scale up, but you're not ready to invest in a really expensive piece of equipment, starting with something like a double oven might be a more attainable entry point for you. I open bake on steels, and that is another thing that I would put in here on my best investments list. I have 2 baking steels per oven for a total of 4. And on each steel, I can bake 4 loaves. So I can bake a total of 16 loaves at a time in that double oven. Now, it does require some shuffling and a little bit of hacking to get the steam as opposed to a actual bread oven wouldn't require quite so much babysitting of the process, but it works beautifully. It turns out gorgeous bread. And so I've been really happy with it overall. The second large investment is an extra fridge. So I got actually a freezer. I've talked about this before in other episodes, but an upright freezer off of Facebook Marketplace. And I run it as a fridge using an Inkbird temperature controller, which allows me to maintain a set temperature at a fridge temperature. So it maintains the temperature really well. But when I load a lot of dough in there, I can crank the temperature down and run it as a freezer for a little while to help cool the dough quickly, avoiding overproofing. And then I just bump it back up for its overnight cold proof. So if a fridge is your bottleneck and you know that you need more fridge space, if you have the space to add something like an upright freezer, that can be a really great solution too. Finally, a larger investment that I've made much more recently is my speed rack. This is also called a baker's rack sometimes, or a bun rack. It is a rack on wheels that has anywhere from 10 to 20 levels where you can slide sheet pans on there. And I have a bunch of sheet pans and cooling racks that fit onto them. And so I can proof dough on it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I have English muffins in there right now proofing. I have a plastic cover for it so I can maintain some heat inside if I need to help proof my dough. But then also I can use it for cooling as well. So tomorrow morning when it's bake day, I will just switch it over, put the racks, spread the racks out with the cooling racks on them, and just put all of my loaves on there as they are cooling. And it's so much more efficient. It's a much smaller footprint on the floor than the shelf that I previously had with cooling racks. And it is mobile. It's on wheels, so I can move it around. And it just has added so much more efficiency and flexibility in my bakery space. If you are looking for a cooling rack solution, or you need a better way to store your bins of dough as they are proofing, a speed rack is definitely worth looking into. Well, that is going to wrap up this conversation on my best and worst investments. I hope this has been really helpful, maybe insightful and eye-opening. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. If you have made some great or maybe some poor investments, I would love to hear about them. Screenshot this show and tag me. I'm Caroline Bauer _sourdough. And let me know what you learned or your takeaway or what you've experienced too. I would love to see that and reshare it so we can all connect. As always, if you have not yet rated or reviewed the show, I would love if you would take a minute to do that. It helps other people find the show so that we can all grow thriving businesses together. I will be back very soon with another episode, but until then, happy baking.